Today is going to be a little bit unusual to the normal videos I do. Preamble. It was 2012, I think, maybe 13, and I decided I was going to get into photography that would make me money. At the time, I didn't know if that was going to be portrait photography, commercial, wedding. I didn't know. I just knew something had clicked in my head, and I wanted to use my knowledge, skills and experience in photography in the previous 20-30 years to replace the job I was doing at the time. So I was trying to soak up all the information I possibly could. YouTube was around, but it was nothing like it is now. But I did see a video, and I'm sure it was by a guy called Ralph Gibson. If you don't know who Ralph Gibson is, and he said it was an interview, and he said something like, "Gear doesn't matter," and I've never forgotten that, obviously. And I couldn't work it out. How could this guy, who was holding like a £7,000 or £8,000 Leica with a £10,000 lens on the front of it, how could he say that gear doesn't matter? Fast forward to Sunday, 3 days ago, and I got it. I probably got it before that actually, but Sunday, right, what happened Sunday? I went to an engagement shoot, and I took with me my D780 with my 58 1.4 lens on and a 35 1.4 Sigma art lens, and that was all I took. That was it. And as I was driving there, somehow this thought came back to me that I could remember one of the ways I got weddings in the early days was to do free engagement shoots. And somewhere down the line, maybe a year or two after that, I was still doing free engagement shoots. But by this time, I was taking 2 cameras, about 6 lenses, on-camera flash and off-camera flash with a reflecting umbrella, obviously the triggers to go with it. I was taking so much gear, and I would spend 10 minutes setting up all this stuff to get one shot. And now I take 1 camera and 1 other lens. I think I might understand what Ralph was saying when he said that gear doesn't matter. So I thought I'd do a video about that and explain more about that. And also then lead on to maybe in 1 or 2, I'll do 2 or 3 videos where I look at how my photography has changed and hopefully, in my opinion anyway, has improved. I'm talking weddings, but of course weddings is of a whole variety of different types of photography. So even if you don't shoot weddings, hopefully you might find that interesting. But regardless of what photography you do, what I'm about to say now in this video will apply, I'm sure, to 90% of people. If it doesn't apply to you, you're lucky, you're one of the exceptions. So what happens when we get into photography? When we buy a camera? In 2012 I had a D700, decided to do weddings. I think I did 1 wedding with just the D700 and probably a zoom lens and a 50 and a nifty 50. After that, started buying gear, and probably 2-3 years later I probably had well no, at some point I had 3 cameras, the holy trinity of zoom lenses. I had every prime lens you could think of, 3 flashes I think. I just had a mountain of gear, and I would take that to every wedding, and at some point throughout that wedding I would probably use almost all of that gear, because I was in this mindset that I had to use the right gear for the right shot to get the best results. Ralph Gibson, gear doesn't matter. Let me explain. So I think as photographers we go through this phase and I'm going to call it a bit like the Big Bang, the birth of the universe, the expansion phase and then the contraction phase. And I think if you I haven't seen any other videos about this, but I think this is relevant because if you know where you are on this, which phase you're in, it might help you to determine where you go from here and why your photography maybe isn't improving. So we get a camera. I haven't got a camera here. Anyway, you get a camera, any camera. You've already made a decision. What brand, what camera, what lens are you going to get? You've already had decisions to make. You've got the camera. You use it. You watch some YouTube videos. You look at the results. You maybe go into Lightroom and think, if only I had a XYZ, etc. That shot would probably have been better. And at some point you get XYZ lens, flash, change the camera, get another camera. I'm also prompted by people I see on Facebook groups. There's the Nikon user group, and I see people posting on there saying, well, I've got the, talking about the Z8, sorry, I'm just digressing, but talking about the Z8, and they're saying, well, I've already got a Z50 or 30 or something, and I've got a Z6 II, and I've got a Z9, and I'll probably get the Z8 if it comes out, providing it's 65 megapixels. And I'm thinking, what the hell do you photograph? Who pays you enough money to have all this gear? I have nothing like that sort of amount of gear now. I've never spent that sort of amount of money on gear, even though I consider myself professional. Gear has to pay for itself. Okay, maybe if I was super rich, I would buy a Z9. I'm not sure. But this is what this is about. So you get gear, and you get more and more gear. Or maybe you don't, but maybe you just try using the gear you've got in different ways. Maybe you try manual, maybe you try shutter priority, maybe you try aperture priority. Maybe you get some manual focus lenses and you're playing around with manual focus lenses. So this expansion phase that I'm talking about is gear, but also the way that you use this gear, the ways that it can be used, because the more gear you get, obviously the more permutations there are in the possible ways you can use that gear, and we end up with so many possibilities that our photography doesn't improve. And certainly as a wedding photographer in my career, if you call it that, that's the phase that I went through, and it lasted 2, 3, 4 years before I finally started to whittle that down and start to focus more on the actual photography rather than the gear or how I use that gear. Now, don't get me wrong, I do agree that how you use the gear that you've got can make a huge difference, obviously, in your photography, but the more gear you've got, the more permutations of those possibilities you've got. So we get to this point where, you know, we've got all these possibilities, we've got all this gear and different ways we can use it. And many people, I think, get stuck at that point. Certainly from some of the things I see on Facebook groups, people are in this very wide, my photos are rubbish, but I've got all the best gear in the world type of syndrome. And really, I think your photography only starts to get better when you start to get into the contraction phase. When you get to the point where you say, why have I got this? Why have I got this Z9? I actually find that I really like using the Z6 II. I never use this. I don't need the Z9. I think I'll sell that. And I will not spend that money on buying something else. You actually start to get less and less gear. There's another group I'm a member of, which is the Nikon D700 group. You can go out and you can buy a Nikon D700 for about, in the UK here, for about, you can get a good one for about £300, 350 maybe. You can buy an F-mount 50mm 1.4 G lens, or the 1.8 even G lens, or the D lens is even cheaper. And trust me, I know, because I had one. I now have sold it. I I had a D700 for 7, 8, 9 years. But that camera and that lens, which together will cost less than £500, will get you award-winning photos. You can take photos that will be publishable on the front page of Vogue. It's a no-brainer. You can do it if you know how to do it. The photography side of it, that is. So gear doesn't matter. I get what Ralph was saying all those years ago. And I've now reduced my gear and reduced it. And it actually came to a bit of a head when I went to Sony at the end in 2019. I got rid of all my Nikon gear apart from my D700. And I just got a Sony a7 III and 3 prime lenses. And that is what suddenly got me into shooting with a lot less gear. I did have a backup, an A6000, just in case I actually needed a backup. I never did, so I just shot with one camera, swapped the lenses over as I needed to, and that was it. And that simplified my photography a huge amount. When I came back to Nikon, 2 years ago, a D780 and a Z5. And whilst I've dabbled, as you will know if you've seen some of my videos, I dabbled with a D500, a D850, and I've dabbled with those. It's not been a case of expanding again. That was a case of I just want to see how this works at a wedding. And as you'll know if you've seen my videos, the D500 didn't meet the mark because of its noise, and the D850, well, I swapped it for the D780. So now I shoot a wedding with a D780, a Z6 II. My Z5 is a video camera, so I'm excluding that. And really just 3 lenses. A 24 to 70, 2.8, specifically for the bride walking down the aisle and shots like that, where I need in a fraction of a second to change from a 70mm to a 24mm, to go from the bride right at the end of the aisle, just the bride and her dad, down to the whole scene. So I need that lens, and I use that lens. The other lens, 35 1.4, and that is pretty much all I shoot for the entire day, apart from when I'm doing shots with the bride and groom, sort of the staged, posed, if you want, shots, when I will use my 58 1.4. And those 3 lenses and those 2 cameras are the only things I take to a wedding now. I could, if push came to shove, just use a 35 1.4 lens and 1 camera. So that has allowed me, I think, to focus more on the photography. What shots am I getting, rather than what gear am I going to use. And I know that my main camera and lens throughout most of the day is going to be the D780 with a 35 Sigma art lens on. So I really now do appreciate and understand what Ralph Gibson was saying, that gear doesn't matter. It doesn't, to a point. It's much more about what you do with the gear and how you take those photos, rather than the gear that you use to get those photos. And when you come to this contraction phase, when you eliminate what you don't need, when you stop, as I was guilty of, when you stop experimenting with different gear, different cameras, different ways of using that stuff, and focus just on improving the photography that you're doing, then I think that's the point for me that my photography started to get better. It probably got gradually better over all the years, but a noticeable improvement since I came back to Nikon after the Sony experiment, with a lot less gear. And this also has sparked my thoughts about the Z8, and I'm sure everyone knows about the Z8 and the rumours. This is the most anticipated camera I think Nikon can ever have come out with. And going through in my head, well, am I going to buy this? And the answer is almost emphatically 100% no. I don't need a better camera. My D780, and I've gone back to a DSLR, whereas last year I was using the Z6 II and the Z5. I've gone back to a D780. Why have I gone back to a DSLR from these fabulous mirrorless things? And the answer is a DSLR gets me closer to the photo. The experience of using a DSLR, okay, albeit a really modern, Nikon's last DSLR they're probably ever going to make, enables me to, I don't know, it's about using the right tool for the job, and that just works for me better than a Z6 II. The images are exactly the same. It's the experience of using that piece of kit against another piece of kit. Because even though this is a paid job, for me it's I'm not saying I would do it for nothing, but I still absolutely love doing wedding photography, and I enjoy it, and I want to get everything I can out of it, because I think by doing that I produce the best photos I can, which then I can give to the client. So whilst the Z8 might have, when it comes out, who knows, might have 65 megapixels, who the hell cares? Who wants 65 megapixels, for goodness sake? Maybe there's 2% of professional photographers in the world who need 65 megapixels. Maybe there's some sports action photographers who need the vastly improved Z9 type autofocus. Having said that, I find the D780's autofocus is amazing, and I'm not sure if it's quite as on the same level as a Z9, but it's pretty damn close. So what I think I'm saying, what I'm rambling on about, is think about where you are on this journey through this expansion phase into this contraction phase. At that point you will be able to focus properly on photography and not gear. What I'm going to do in the next video is I'm going to go through my wedding photography. I'm going to show you some of my early shots and some of my recent shots. I'm going to talk about the gear I used, the way I got the shots, and how my attention, I must stop using the word focus, how my attention has changed from using the right gear, aperture, flash and all the other stuff into appreciating light 10 times more than I ever did before, using the camera in a very, very simple way, so it is almost as close as I can get to literally a point and shoot camera, so that I don't need to go through any thought processes about gear. It is all about getting that photograph. But also we'll then look at Lightroom, because over the years I've used Lightroom more and more. Lightroom has become more and more capable, and how again, as a wedding photographer, what am I offering my clients that's different to Steve down the road and John over there? How am I different? Why are they going to book me and pay me more money than they're going to pay these guys? And the answer is because my photos are different. And whilst I can make my photos different, and I do make my photos different, I think, by the way I actually take the shots and use the gear that I've got, but also then what do I do with them in Lightroom? And that, I think, these days does have a big effect on my success as a wedding photographer. But I'll cover that in the next video. I will try and do that in the next few days, so watch out for that. If you haven't already, if you subscribe, you'll get to see that next video, and you can waste a few afternoons looking through some old videos as well if you want to. Thanks for watching. Hope you found that useful. Cheers for now.